6th August 1945, summer was in full force in Japan's Hiroshima city. It was a pleasant day, the sky was blue, and the sun was shining. A typical Monday morning. At 8 a.m., people were arriving at their offices, children were at school, in their first period of the day. Meanwhile, some people spotted an American Boeing B-29 aircraft in the sky. At 8:15 a.m., something fell out of the aircraft. From a distance, people couldn't figure out what it was, the thing falling out of the aircraft. Not even in their dreams could they have imagined that it was an atomic bomb. 43 seconds. It was in freefall for exactly 43 seconds. After that, in the blink of an eye, it was all over. Thousands of people in the city saw a blinding light in the last seconds of their lives. The bomb blast created an instant fireball as if the sun had descended upon Earth. The temperatures reached 4,000 degrees Celsius. In the blink of an eye, 80,000 people were killed. This leads to the inevitable question: why was the bomb dropped? In today's video, let us understand the story of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
By the genius of man, a new age is born, the roar of thunder and the fire of the sun.
At 8:15 in the morning of August 6th, the first atomic bomb struck an enemy target.
In this instant, Robert Oppenheimer recalls a passage from a sacred book of the Hindu.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Our story began during the Second World War. This war broke out in 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. One by one, other countries were drawn into the war. The Second World War was being fought between two major alliances, Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan on one side, known as the Axis powers, and Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States on the other side, known as the Allied powers or the Allies. Countries like France and China were also part of the Allies. But initially, America was trying its best to stay out of the war. After the devastating results of the First World War, America had decided that it would not interfere in conflicts in Europe and Asia to stay out of them completely. But in 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, forcing the United States to join the war.
Since the unprovoked attack by Japan on Sunday, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
It is important to understand things from Japan's context. Whenever the Second World War is discussed, we focus mostly on Germany and Hitler, but we rarely talk about Japan. The truth is, during the early 1900s, Japan had ambitions of its own. Imperialism was seen in Japan, similar to how Britain, France, and other European countries were annexing and colonizing other nations. Japan was doing the same. Until 1940, Indonesia, Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, eastern regions of China, North Korea, South Korea, and Laos were all part of the Japanese Empire. The Japanese colonizers spoke of building a greater Asia, and Asia that would be united. But that was merely a front. In reality, just like other colonizers, they captured territories to exploit their resources and benefit only themselves. Their first major expansion took place in 1931 when they captured the Manchu region in northern China. They then planned to move further north to capture areas under the Soviet Union in Mongolia. In the south, they aimed to seize Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The issue was that these southern regions, modern-day Vietnam and Cambodia, were part of the French Empire, at that time known as French Indochina. Since Japan wanted to capture these territories, they first had to defeat the French Empire. This happened in 1940. They declared war on France and captured these regions. But by doing so, Japan officially became a participant in the Second World War. While Hitler was declaring wars and annexing territories across Europe, Japan was doing the same in Asia. America saw this happening but still did not want to interfere in the war militarily. However, they knew they had to do something to stop Japan's growing aggression. So they decided to take economic action instead. America stopped exporting essential materials to Japan, such as copper, iron, and steel, hoping that this would discourage Japan's expansionist ambitions. But it didn't work. In response, America took a stronger step. They stopped selling oil to Japan. Back then, oil was an extremely important resource for Japan. Around 80% of the oil used in Japan was imported from America. America made it clear that oil supplies would resume only on one condition: Japan had to withdraw from the Chinese territories it had occupied and break its alliance with Germany and Italy. But doing so would mean abandoning the Japanese dream of creating a greater Asia, something their emperor was not willing to accept. So, Japan decided to ignore America's warnings and started looking for alternatives. They noticed that the regions of Malaysia and Indonesia were rich in oil and other natural resources. Japan planned to capture these areas and drill for oil to meet their own needs, ending their dependency on America. However, there was one major problem. At that time, Indonesia was known as the Dutch East Indies, under Dutch control, and Malaysia was part of British Malaya. Under British control, both the British and Dutch were America's allies. This meant that if Japan attacked their territories, America might be forced to retaliate to defend its allies. There was still a small chance that America might stay out of it. But Japan also planned to capture the Philippines, which was an American territory back then. America had occupied and colonized the Philippines, and if Japan attacked it, America would definitely go to war. How could the dream of a greater Asia be fulfilled without including the Philippines? Japan was left with only one option: they had to occupy and colonize these regions. And in case America decided to attack them, America would need to be silenced first. Japan knew that America's military strength was far greater. In a prolonged war, Japan would lose. So, they made a different plan. If they could stealthily attack America's military bases and destroy their fighter jets and naval vessels, then perhaps America would lose its ability to fight back. With this thought, on 7th December 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on America's Pearl Harbor Bay.
December 7th, 1941. High overhead, Jap raiders are on the loose. Without warning, they circle Pearl Harbor and the city of Honolulu. A surprise attack born of infamy.
More than 350 aircraft of the Japanese Navy attacked and bombed the harbor. Within 2 hours, 19 U.S. Navy ships, 188 military aircraft, and more than 2,000 American military personnel were killed. Within hours, Japan moved forward and captured the Philippines. America declared war against Japan. This was the moment when America officially became involved in the Second World War. After this, Britain and China also declared war against Japan. Seeing this happen, Nazi Germany and Italy declared war on the United States 3 days later. By the end of 1941, the Second World War was in full swing. All major countries had declared war on one another. Now, without going into too many details about the actual battles, we come to the surrender of Italy in 1943. Then, on 30th April 1945, Hitler ended his life by shooting himself. Germany surrendered soon after. Among the Axis powers, Japan was the only nation that refused to surrender. Despite continual losses, the Japanese emperor still wasn't willing to give up. At this point, it's important to understand the mindset of Japanese fascism. The common people of Japan were heavily brainwashed. The reigning emperor Hirohito was portrayed as a divine being, a blessing sent from the gods. People literally worshipped him as a god and blindly believed whatever he said. Anyone who disagreed with him was branded a traitor. Since the Japanese emperor claimed that colonizing other nations was for their own good, the people accepted it as truth. When they went to war, they believed it was for a noble purpose. Anyone who opposed the war inside Japan was hunted down and executed. Additionally, certain Japanese traditions and cultural values were twisted to manipulate public sentiment. One clear example of this was the Bushido, the samurai code of honor. According to the Bushido tradition, samurais had to remain constantly aware of death, ready to sacrifice their lives at any moment. They were taught to see death as the end and not to fear it. But this tradition was twisted and presented to the people in a new way, that a true samurai was one who was willing to die for the emperor. That dying for the emperor was the greatest honor, and surrendering to the enemy was the ultimate humiliation. When people are brainwashed like this, they become willing to lay down their lives. And that is exactly what happened. This led to the creation of the kamikaze units. These pilots were ordered to crash their fighter jets directly into enemy warships, sacrificing themselves. In simple terms, suicide attacks. And it did not stop there. Even children were trained to carry explosives and lie down in front of enemy tanks, sacrificing themselves in an attempt to destroy them. Of course, not everyone was brainwashed. There are heartbreaking accounts from kamikaze pilots who wrote letters to their families the night before their missions, crying, questioning whether what they were being asked to do was truly for the good of the country, or merely for the ambitions of those in power. Meanwhile, America and the other allied nations hoped that conditions inside Japan would force a surrender. Unemployment was at an all-time high, food was scarce, and people were starving everywhere. They believed the citizens would rise against the emperor and pressure him to surrender. But that never happened. America saw only one remaining option: a full-scale invasion of Japan, sending their military forces directly onto Japanese soil to overthrow the emperor. This plan was named Operation Downfall. The final major battle before this invasion was the Battle of Okinawa. It lasted from 1st April 1945 to 22nd June 1945. On the map, the Okinawa Islands lie to the south of Japan. America sent its forces to capture these islands and eliminate all resistance, clearing the path for Operation Downfall. But the Battle of Okinawa shocked America. The Japanese people were not willing to surrender. Every man, woman, and child seemed ready to fight until their last breath. Even the last person standing was fighting to their very end. There were continuous kamikaze attacks, one suicide mission after another. There was absolutely no intention of surrendering. This made defeating the Japanese forces extremely difficult. This is why the Battle of Okinawa is remembered as the bloodiest battle in the Pacific War. Eventually, America won the battle, but at a massive cost. Around 12,000 American soldiers were killed and more than 50,000 were injured. On the other side, nearly 110,000 Japanese soldiers lost their lives. The people living in Okinawa are known as Okinawans. During this battle, more than 100,000 Okinawan civilians were killed. That meant nearly 1/4 of the island's population was wiped out. In other words, about 25% of the people living on the island lost their lives. When American military leaders looked at these numbers, they realized that this posed a serious problem for Operation Downfall. Yes, they might eventually win by sending their forces into mainland Japan, but at what cost? If 12,000 American soldiers could be killed on just one small island, then capturing the main Japanese islands through ground combat would lead to unimaginable casualties. Thousands more American soldiers would die. Millions of Japanese soldiers and civilians could be killed. The war would drag on endlessly, because the Japanese population had been so deeply brainwashed that surrender was not an option for them. America and the Allied powers realized that they would have to find another way to force Japan to surrender. Then, on 12th April 1945, the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had served as president throughout the Second World War, passed away. The Vice President, Harry Truman, became the new President of the United States, and the responsibility of finding a solution to end the war with Japan now rested entirely on his shoulders. Harry Truman considered several options. One was to negotiate with the Japanese Emperor Hirohito for peace. But this idea was quickly dismissed because the emperor had already made it clear that he would not surrender. Around this time, Truman was informed about a top-secret United States military project, the Manhattan Project. Under this project, scientists were secretly developing the world's first atomic bomb. On 16th July 1945, the atomic bomb was tested at a remote testing site in New Mexico. The test was successful. Truman believed that he had finally found a solution to end the war. He discussed this development with senior military leaders and top government officials, debating how this weapon could be used. They decided to issue one final warning to Japan before deploying the atomic bomb. Not even in their wildest dreams could the Japanese people have imagined that a weapon like the atomic bomb even existed. By July 1945, anti-war sentiment among the people of Japan had grown significantly. Citizens were exhausted by years of constant war. People were starving, unemployment was widespread, and the economy was in ruins. But the people could not openly oppose the military or the emperor unless the military itself turned against him. The Japanese emperor might have been willing to surrender if he had been assured that he would remain in power under occupation. But America demanded unconditional surrender with no guarantees. On 29th July 1945, Japan officially rejected the Potsdam Declaration. After this, on 3rd August 1945, President Harry Truman authorized the use of the atomic bomb against Japan. On 6th August 1945, an American Boeing B-29 aircraft flew over the city of Hiroshima. On board was the atomic bomb known as Little Boy, a deeply ironic name for the first atomic bomb ever used in warfare. Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m., this bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and America became the first and only country in the world to use nuclear weapons in warfare. The people who were present in Hiroshima that day, the ones who survived, tell an unbearably painful story. They said that first there was a blinding flash of light, so intense that many people were temporarily blinded. Immediately after that came a blast so loud that numerous survivors suffered permanent hearing loss. This was followed by temperatures reaching nearly 4,000 degrees Celsius on the ground, which instantly vaporized people within the blast radius. It all happened so fast that only shadows of people were left behind, dark imprints permanently burned onto walls and rocks. These shadows can still be seen today. Those who were not killed instantly could not comprehend what had happened. Before they could understand anything, the shock waves from the blast struck. The sudden temperature changes created extremely powerful winds, almost like a hurricane. Debris from houses, shards of glass, and fragments of everyday life were hurled through the air. After some minutes, when the winds finally calmed, people looked up at the sky. What they saw was unimaginable. The blue, sunny sky from 15 minutes earlier was now completely covered in black, toxic dust. Nearly 70% of the buildings in Hiroshima were destroyed. The city was no longer a city. Satellite images from before and after the bombing revealed total devastation. I will not go into graphic details about the bodies found there, because they are deeply disturbing. All that needs to be said is that skin was peeling away, and people were so severely dehydrated that they were in constant agony. About half an hour after the explosion, it began to rain. People initially believed this rain would bring relief, but instead, the toxic dust in the air mixed with moisture to form poisonous clouds. This was not normal rain. Every drop was black. It was described as grease falling from the sky, deadly and radioactive. Normally, after a disaster, doctors and ambulances rush in to help survivors. But in Hiroshima, nearly 90% of healthcare workers were killed instantly, and most hospitals were destroyed. There was no one left to help. Many of those who survived the initial blast died days, weeks, or months later due to radiation sickness. After this bombing, it is said that hardliners within the Japanese military refused even to hold a serious meeting. To them, this was just another bomb, larger but not enough to justify surrender. The Japanese emperor still refused to surrender. In response, 3 days later, on 9th August 1945, America dropped a second atomic bomb, this time on Nagasaki. At around 11 a.m., another American Boeing B-29 aircraft flew over the city, carrying an even more powerful bomb known as Fat Man. The mushroom cloud from this explosion was far larger. Around 40,000 people were killed immediately, and approximately 6.7 square kilometers of the city were completely destroyed. Although the bomb dropped on Nagasaki was more powerful, the number of casualties was lower than in Hiroshima, and there were several reasons for this. First, when other cities learned about what had happened in Hiroshima, people were already being warned. Pamphlets were dropped, cautioning citizens that something similar could happen to their own cities. As a result, people were better prepared. Many had already moved away from city centers to the outskirts. Additionally, Nagasaki was surrounded by hills. These hills significantly reduced the impact of the explosion. Hiroshima, on the other hand, was located on flat land, with no natural barriers, which meant it suffered far greater destruction. In total, across these two bombings, nearly 200,000 people were killed. Around 95% of the victims were civilians, ordinary people, not military personnel. After this devastation, the Japanese Supreme Council finally convened to discuss surrender. Some members were now genuinely afraid that America would continue bombing Japanese cities if they did not surrender. However, many members of the council were still firmly opposed to surrender. When the vote was held, the decision was split evenly, 3 members in favor of surrender and 3 against it. With no clear decision, the Japanese emperor was asked to act as the tiebreaker. In the end, Emperor Hirohito chose to surrender. But the atomic bombings were not the only reason behind Japan's surrender. A few hours before the bombing of Nagasaki, the Soviet Union had also declared war on Japan. The region of Manchuria in northern China, which had been under Japanese control, was swiftly invaded and occupied by Soviet forces. On one side, America was destroying Japanese cities from the air. On the other, the Soviet Union was advancing on land. At the same time, in Japan's occupied territories across Japan and Southeast Asia, local populations were becoming increasingly hostile and rebellious. Faced with pressure from all directions, Emperor Hirohito finally decided to surrender. The time is 9:05 a.m. The Japanese have been on board for exactly 10 minutes. Some members of the Japanese military were furious at this decision. They refused to accept surrender and attempted to stage a coup against the emperor. But the coup failed. Finally, on 15th August 1945, after Japan's surrender, the Second World War officially came to an end.